Artificial intelligence. There are other big topics like crypto, like blockchain, but there is this other big topic, artificial intelligence. And apart from your toothbrush being enhanced with artificial intelligence, there is this bigger problem that artificial intelligence will, at some point in time, if all the current developments continue, will create a singularity, a technological singularity, basically a point in time where the artificial intelligence influences all the other things that there are, such as humans, for example, for planet Earth, which is also the reason many scientists have a special name for the age of the human, the Anthropocene, I think it's pronounced. I looked it up, it's called Anthropocene. So, about this topic, about a singularity, about the technological singularity, and just in general, a superintelligence, Nick Bostrom wrote a book about. So I discovered Nick Bostrom when I watched videos on YouTube by Lex Fridman, so the podcast Lex Fridman has about artificial intelligence, and he interviewed Nick Bostrom about the axioms of the simulation theory, which he also laid out in his book Superintelligence. Basically, simulation theory is the theory that the chances of us living in a real world and these things around us aren't simulated in a computer world are actually pretty high if we consider or if we assume all these axioms Nick Bostrom laid out. So I was intrigued because this guy seemed to have some thoughts about artificial intelligence and about superintelligence and about simulation theory, and therefore I was interested but I forgot about him until I recently had discovered a site where you actually could see what famous people read, and Elon Musk recommended Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, because Elon Musk obviously is involved with OpenAI, but also with Tesla, and maybe also with SpaceX. I don't know about that, but he is involved, and also with Neuralink, in the development of artificial intelligence, and also maybe an intelligence that is basically an enhanced human intelligence. So Nick Bostrom now has written this book, and it's quite old already, but nevertheless it still, I think, applies. In this book he basically just dissects and analyzes all the different parts that are there when it comes to the superintelligence, when it comes to the thing that may just change things forever once it arises. He begins the book after an anecdote with these words: inside your cranium is the thing that does the reading. This thing, the human brain, has some capabilities that the brains of other animals lack. It is to these distinctive capabilities that we owe our dominant position on the planet. Other animals have stronger muscles and sharper claws, but we have cleverer brains. Our modest advantage in general intelligence has led us to develop language, technology, and complex social organization. The advantage has compounded over time as each generation has built on the achievements of its predecessors. And there are already many things in this. There are many different living beings on this planet, but apart from using them and apart from seeing them as something entirely different, we as humans don't really have use for these other living forms anywhere. We search for all of these other life forms in the universe, maybe all of these, but at the same time we basically on Earth just view the Earth as the human Earth. This is not so much something Nick Bostrom actually wrote. So now, what is the idea of the artificial intelligence, of the artificial general intelligence? We already have in many aspects of our lives, and also when it comes to not only of our lives, but when it comes to very specific topics. For example, we have Deep Blue, which already is... So there were different programs that tried to compete with humans in the most complex games we came up with. This was in the past chess, and then it was also the game Go. And in both games, the artificial intelligence, or computers, have reached, or programs you could also say, have reached a level that exceeds the human level already. The problem is just that all of these different topics, all of these different areas are very specific, and therefore we, as of right now, don't have something that comes close to the human brain in terms of general intelligence, in terms of having a general understanding. That's also the reason why it's called general artificial intelligence. And once something like this arises, that's basically called superintelligence, because super is just a word that's used to basically superize something. Now, we have superintelligence, and it's not that we have it, it's just that we have it as a concept. Now, the idea is, what are all the different things we actually have to discuss when it comes to superintelligence? Should we, for example, maybe try to slow down the progress of finding a superintelligence or an artificial general intelligence to maybe get the control problem right? There are many different heads in this world we now live in, and for example, the CEOs of Google and the CEOs of Microsoft, and all of these different people have different opinions, and maybe also Zuckerberg, for example. And the idea is now that currently, not really currently, but that's kind of, again, a personal thing, is currently that not many do realize the extent of the control problem. The problem is as follows. Just imagine ants. And now imagine you want to build a road, and there is something ants build. Now, we as humans don't really think about, oh yeah, we are hurting their feelings, or we are hurting their structures they built, or maybe we are throwing down their cultural level to the medieval level. We just don't think about this. And that's also maybe an idea about how aliens would think about us, because chances are aliens are either, if aliens actually would reach us, so if there was life out there, maybe also not really organic life, but maybe machine life, you could also say, or non-organic life, then chances are they are not exactly on the same level in terms of intelligence or development as we are. And that's also a problem, because obviously if they are more intelligent, then the end problem again is there. The end problem is that we are not even interested in what ants theoretically have to say about us building a road, because the road is just more important to us. And the same could apply either for alien life, that could also be a superintelligence, but also for the superintelligence we eventually will build if we don't destroy ourselves or all the progress in the level of technology we made up to this point. So now the question is, one of the biggest questions is how to control this artificial intelligence, how to control the superintelligence. One very easy example is this. Imagine we built a program that actually has the purpose of finding all the numbers of pi. And the problem is obviously, because that's the ultimate goal, and pi is just infinite. Therefore, the ultimate goal, in order to fulfill this ultimate goal, obviously something that has a general intelligence would use every single tool it has. And this could result in converting the whole galaxy, converting the whole solar system, or maybe the whole universe into a finding pi machine. That's one of the biggest problems. Then there is also the value problem, because the problem is that we cannot predict what something smarter than us, something with an IQ maybe 10 times, maybe 100 times, maybe 100 billion times smarter than us. And of course, IQ is just a measurement we have developed as a human race to measure the IQ, the general intelligence of a person. But that's just something I just used in order to visualize the scale of the artificial intelligence, or of how smart this artificial intelligence actually could be. So we have the control problem. We also have the value problem, because most of the values we actually think we have as humans are very loosely defined, and we cannot pin them down. We don't even have human rights for that long, and we don't even, as of now, we don't even give animals, for example, on this planet rights, even though a monkey, for example, sometimes has an IQ, or a gorilla or a bonobo sometimes just might have an IQ, or actually has measured an IQ of 90, which is a little bit below average, but also not if you consider the normal range, which is 85 to 115, in which most people actually fall in. So therefore, monkeys are actually quite smart if we compare them to a rock, for example. And this problem of us, again, looking down on something that is just a little bit less intelligent than us becomes, again, a problem when we try to predict. It doesn't become a problem, but it is an indicator of how something that is just a little bit smarter than us actually will treat us. So therefore, the problem is how to program these values. And the problem is that we don't really have good definitions of all of these values we have as humans, or we consider as humans. For example, consider something like it should be the AI should be friendly, but at the same time, as seen in many science fiction movies, when there is something that realizes that humans are basically not good for planet Earth, and planet Earth is something that's quite exceptional, at least in our solar system, and maybe at least in our galaxy, and maybe even in the whole universe, then the problem obviously is that what do we do with these humans? And that's maybe a fear, but fear is not really something you should actually use because it's just an emotion. But maybe it motivates you as a listener to get into the control problem of artificial intelligence. Maybe it does. So now one of the ideas I already mentioned is, would it make sense, for example, to stop the progress or to try to reduce the progress or to reduce the velocity of the progress that is made when it comes to artificial intelligence and the development of artificial intelligence? Because chances are, as time goes on, humans just become smarter and smarter and smarter. This has to do with the human colossus, which is built in between us all, which is also called culture, which is basically the general knowledge we share and we can actually learn if we grow up. And also, maybe because of this, but maybe because of other factors I won't now discuss further, it is actually a general trend that humans become smarter. So if Einstein had an IQ of 160 or 170, then if you compare an IQ around 1900 or 1920 or 1945 to somebody who lives nowadays, then you can't really compare them, because the IQ is just a measurement, a statistic measurement that basically says at which part of the distribution of the intelligence of the current population you actually are. So if you have an IQ, for example, of 115, then this means you're just above average. You're just within the normal range, actually. But if you have an IQ of 116, that means you're just a little bit smarter than the average human. The average, obviously, is 100. It's not obviously, but it is stated as 100. So now, back to artificial intelligence. And back to why we just might slow down the progress of artificial intelligence. If we become smarter, and also if we maybe, before developing a general artificial intelligence as that acts as a technological singularity, if we, before this comes in place, are just a little bit smarter and have just a little bit more time, and maybe also discover ways to enhance the performance of humans, the cognitive performances of humans, with something like Neuralink, where we actually can maybe physically connect our brain to other brains or to the internet, or use it as a bigger communication device that works on a higher level in order to transmit ideas better than just using words in our hands, then we can maybe get the control problem right to a higher probability, and this just might result in us having maybe a better role in this world after the technological singularity arises. Then, similar to this problem, but also I would say within the same area, but in the same area of thoughts, you could say, is another problem. If we, for example, develop, or the progress of nanotechnology is a progress, so at some point in time, technology also becomes a risk. And as many, I guess, saw, and as we saw with the invention of the atomic bomb or things like these, then of course technology also is a risk, because technology just means more ability to actually do the things you want to do. And if the things you just want to do, the goals are not very friendly, you could say, but instead are winning at war, in the Second World War, for example, then this becomes a problem. And if we now take any technology, for example, nanotechnology, and this is actually an example he mentions in the book, and try to predict, or not really try to predict, if we just take nanotechnology as one example, at some point in time, there is a huge risk involved. Not really at some point in time, but there is a general risk involved if we evolve technologies, if we progress technologies actually forward. There is a risk that is involved. And now the problem is, would it be smarter if we first had the technological singularity or the general intelligence, or if we first had this other problem. So it's basically managing the different problems that arise at different points in time of all these different technologies we are developing. But chances are, as with humans, and here I am coming back basically to the preface I already read to you, the capability, the cognitive capability, the intelligence of humans is the one thing that sets us apart from all the others, and that apart from all the other living things on this planet, and allowed us to basically dominate this planet. And now if we just imagine something that is twice as smart as us, then probably the thing twice as smart as us, or 100 times or 10 times or 1,000 times, as I already mentioned, just has this big advantage. That is the one big advantage that set us apart from all the other living things already. So, managing all the different risks or the different catastrophes that could potentially happen when it comes to developing these different technologies, and where should the general artificial intelligence actually evolve, or where should it start? And we can kind of influence this. And this, again, is the control problem, maybe a little bit, or it intertwines with the control problem, because if we, for example, learn something from these other catastrophes we already encounter, and we have 100 years of human development and human progress more, then we just might have a chance, or I would say, if there is not something that prevents the human technological level from progressing any further, it just is kind of an obvious prediction that is obviously not true to 100%, but very likely that we will be able to control an artificial intelligence at least a tiny bit better. This is the control problem, and also the other technologies. Then there is the question of how does an artificial intelligence actually develop, or much less how, but when. So imagine a world in which there are, again, competing superpowers like today, like China, like Russia, like the USA, and maybe the European Union, and maybe Africa in the future, maybe India also. But just imagine a world where we have artificial intelligence being developed, or a general artificial intelligence being developed in all these different countries. Now, or just in different entities, you could say. So now the question is, what happens if, for example, the US has the first artificial intelligence, and then a week later, others have artificial intelligence? And here is where it becomes really tricky. If it would be the case that the one artificial intelligence could basically, this is also where it intertwines with something else. So up until now, software development is really kind of a problem, because it's just a problem where humans kind of reach the limits of their cognitive capabilities. And now if we have something that's just a little bit smarter than us, then chances are it can develop the software problem, or it can encounter the software problem just better than us. So now currently you could say we have too much hardware for somebody, or for a software that runs then just a little bit better, or something that is better at developing software. This means if we actually then develop an artificial intelligence, or if somebody develops an artificial intelligence, then we basically have too much hardware. It's not that it's too much, but in terms of limiting the GAI, general artificial intelligence's capabilities, it's not very useful to just have too much hardware lying around and being basically accessible to this artificial intelligence, to even further enlarge the level of the artificial intelligence. So let's just imagine we have artificial intelligence, a GAI, that is developed in the US, and a few weeks later we have something in India, or in Russia, or in China. It actually probably is most likely that it is in China or the US at this point in time. But I am not quite sure about this prediction. I read a book about China and artificial intelligence for a few years ago. So now, and also Nick Bostrom doesn't really mention the country of origin of the GAI. So if we now have a GAI that is developed in the US, the question now is, how much does it mean, or how much advantage, or how much benefit does it have to be a week early, to be a day early, to be maybe 2 hours early, or earlier than the other GAI that is also developed? And now, if we consider that intelligence is, or if we assume again that intelligence is basically the multiplication thing that allows us to develop technology and also develop this till now human colossus further, and also develop software and things like these, and basically get a better chance at solving all the different allocation problems that there are. For example, economics these days. I mean, economics in general is just a allocation problem. This means getting the right resources to the right person, basically to the right entity. For example, these days we have enough food to feed the world. It's just a problem of getting the food to the right places. So now, if something like a GAI actually has just a slight head start when it comes to it being alive, you could say, then the question is what the effects are on the question of whether there will be a single artificial intelligence or many different artificial intelligences. So if there is only one, Nick Bostrom calls this a singleton because it's single, and if there are many others, I actually can't remember the name he has given, maybe he hasn't given. So this is also something to consider. Will there only be one artificial intelligence? And obviously then the question is, if the US then has the artificial intelligence and it to some capacity can control what it actually does, then of course the US will be the new superpower, because intelligence seems to be, or cognitive ability, or the ability to solve problems, seems to be the one distinctive feature we humans have used to gain our dominance in this world, on this earth, on this planet, maybe in the solar system in the future. And if something or some entity has basically higher cognitive capabilities, then the question is, what influence does this have on geopolitics and things like this? These are only a few questions Nick Bostrom tries to answer. Actually, the book is quite complex, and he also deals with different formulas that actually try to predict at which point in time the artificial intelligence, for example, arises, and what is influenced, or what the influence factors are, what the contributing variables actually are. And I have to say, I have to admit that, I mean, I did listen to it, and I also couldn't listen to it all the time because it was just, nevertheless, I listened to it from the beginning to the end. It is just a book that makes more sense reading it basically on paper. And nevertheless, I probably will read it in the future again, because it just was, to my eyes at least, a book that finally has met all these different terms. Of course, there are people talking about artificial intelligence and what it theoretically could do, but these often are just using artificial intelligence as a hype word and as a word that is nevertheless then, and the discussion or the TED Talk or whatever it is then just goes on in very simple basic language, but just a deep analysis of what we actually have to do, and just someone with obviously the knowledge of Nick Bostrom dissecting a problem like artificial intelligence is just something that is very interesting, was very interesting to me, and probably should also be very interesting to humankind.